I like those new titles, don't you? Hello, good afternoon and welcome to Now We're Talking, the topical show where we talk about the week's top trending stories even. Put your teeth in. Coming up on today's show, we'll be discussing the annual, it seems, winter NHS crisis, the resignation of Tristram Hunt, the MP for Stoke-on-Trent, Donald Trump's first golden press conference as president-elect, Greenbelt house building, Manchester Council have been ripping up parking tickets, and did it snow near you, and what happens when you can't get to work? That all sounds interesting, doesn't it? My first guest today is author and regular sparring partner David Semple.
Hello.
Hello, how lovely to see you.
Yeah, always good to see you.
Oh,
Really, I mean it.
I always end up laughing when I introduce you, I don't know why. My other fabulous guest is one of my fellow presenters, dearest Paul Davies. Hello to you both.
Hello.
So, as usual, when I do our little discussionette, what's jumped out at you from the news during the week, David?
What's jumped out at me from the news during the week? Actually, it's local news and it's crime. And it seems to me that there's so much crime locally in the city we live in. All types. Murders, muggings, petty crime. People getting, even in my neighborhood, you know, we had somebody stabbed in the neck,
Wow.
not far from the local co-op, and it's getting worse and worse. And I think somebody in the Manchester Police isn't doing their job properly, because you never see any police anywhere walking the streets.
Well, that's cheering. Thanks for that, David. And Paul, what's jumped out at you from this week?
Well, I think it's the dossier that was published by BuzzFeed. Yeah, quite very interesting. A lot of the allegations are like the infamous bed. They don't hold water.
More on that story later. So don't forget, no social media show would be complete without your participation. You can tweet us at That's Manchester using the hashtag That's Talk, or follow us on Facebook. Sometimes I can't get my mouth around these hashtags. I think I'm a bit old. Anyway, let's start off with some horrible stories and news that's been in the press and social media this week about the NHS being in crisis. The Red Cross gave a statement saying it was helping to look after patients in over 20 hospitals, which had also declared a black alert, meaning they couldn't cope with the number of patients they had and probably won't be able to cope with many more. In the UK, this seems to be a recurring annual issue with the NHS. Some people blame the reduction in social care money, stopping people from leaving hospital when they've been treated, and others generally say there's just not enough money spent on patient care and too much spent on management. So obviously this is a difficult subject with lots of angles, but let's try and understand it and start with probably, whenever I've seen it on social media, the most common question, the most common thing that people say, which is, should we just spend more money on the NHS?
No. I'll tell you why. Because it'll go down the same black hole as the current lot of money has. In the last since 2000, the NHS has had massive amounts of money. I mean, Labour practically doubled the size of it, and the Tories have been increasing it every year. And yes, there are management problems. And because I've had doctors say to me, you know, I get $35,000 a year, I'm a paediatrician in a hospital, but there's all these people who've been working for the NHS for like 50 years and they screw it up upstairs. They're basically not running the hospitals properly. I've had people say that to me. But I do think they need to get their act together. When they started closing down accident and emergency, I thought that was a sign that nobody seems to be able to run it properly. But the only thing I'll say is when you have something that's technically, it's not free, we pay for it, free at the point of entry, it gets abused, and a lot of people are abusing the NHS, and that means the people who really need it aren't getting the care they need. So I think there's ample money there. Maybe no government can run it properly, but that's my belief. I'm very cynical about government running it. I'm not saying privatise it, but I just don't think they can run it properly.
Well, don't forget, just before I come to you, Paul, I believe when Labour were last in power, they poured an awful lot of money into it, and introduced the 4-hour waiting times, NHS Direct and so on, and it had a period of relatively calm, it was okay apart from 1 or 2 blips. So I get the pouring lots of money into it makes everything all right, but obviously you can't pour an indefinite amount of money into it. And there are media commentators, I don't want to refer specifically to a young lady that was on The Apprentice, but there are several commentators who say that because something's free at the point of need, people are going to abuse it, are going to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, when you say something like that to, there was a case highlighted this week in a national newspaper of a boy being rushed to hospital with suspected meningitis and was eventually treated on 2 chairs pushed together and things like that. How do you square that with it's free at the point of use, people are going to use and abuse it, with because people are dashing to it because they can't get help anywhere else? What do you do? I'll come to you first, Paul. Plenty to think about that.
Right, okay, going back to the original question, no, we can't keep pouring money into it. We're spending more and more. There's going to come a point where we cannot keep increasing the budget. We've got to look at the management, we've got to look at how it's run, because I think we can push it more and get more back for the money that we spend. Unfortunately, I think the debate, certainly online, you talked about the Red Cross. The head of the Red Cross said that it was a humanitarian crisis. I don't think that helps, because instead of talking about the actual facts and figures, we're talking about our feelings, and all that debate gets lost behind the headlines. So again, watching Question Time Thursday evening, this was a bone of contention, but it's a political football. You got the Conservatives blaming Labour for what they did when they were in power, Labour blaming the Conservatives. I don't think we're going to get very far, because it is a political football. You were saying, something needs to be done. We've got some guy who, I forget his name, who is supposed to be an independent, who's running independently, right, but it's still not independent of the government. So when someone needs to be accountable for what's going on, who is accountable? Is it Jeremy Hunt? Is it this guy from the NHS? No one seems to be going, right, it's our fault, we need to do this. So where do we lay the blame? It's very difficult.
It does seem to be a political football. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn brought it up in Prime Minister's Questions, and then Theresa May responded with that the Red Cross statement was irresponsible and overblown.
It was.
Whilst at the same time saying that she did accept there were isolated incidents where things were going wrong. So if she's sort of sticking to that point of view, and you've got everyone else sort of saying there's a crisis, what's the middle ground? How do we progress from this?
No, look, the real ground is we've got a Conservative government that has to run it until the next election, and the voters have to decide at the next election, which is why we'll be talking about that later. Labour has to be in a position where they can actually win an election to offer an alternative that's realistic. I think we need some original thinking with the NHS. I'm not talking about privatisation, but some of the privatisation within the NHS has actually increased services. I'm talking about the way we fund it and the way everything is for free. In France, you pay to go to the doctor. It's not much, but
do you think
pay.
People should be forced to pay for missed GP appointments, hospital appointments?
No, I think you should just pay to go to the doctor unless you're unemployed.
They should be told. If you've missed a GP appointment, you should be told. You need to know. I think it's something like £100 for a missed GP appointment. It does add up. And I've done it myself. I've gone, oh, do you know what? I can't quite make it. I won't go. And you just knock that off, but it's costing money. But going back to the statements that Theresa May, I think she was right. It was irresponsible to call it a humanitarian crisis, because a humanitarian crisis is what's going on in Yemen. It's it's nothing like that. There is a lot of people who are living through a humanitarian crisis who would love the NHS. Yep. The NHS is doing so well.
About it. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was right to say that that was wrong, and I think it was overblown. Unfortunately, the debate has therefore been ramshackled by the left, and I am a leftist myself, but I think it's wrong of them to just colour this as in it's completely failed. So I'd like to move away from the rhetoric and the point scoring and move into an actual debate.
As a last question, as we come to the end of this segment, I was quite surprised to read that 51% of the staff in the NHS are management, non-clinician administration.
Yep.
Now, as I've also read that the NHS is the biggest employer, I think it's in Europe.
Yeah.
Could that be something to do with pumping lots of money into it and not getting a clinical return rather than an employment return?
I think, like a lot of civil service departments, which is what it is, it's grown like a monster because it chewed up the money, and a lot of people got jobs for the boys and that sort of thing. The doctors are working like hamsters on a wheel. Well, the rest of these guys, like the guys who allow people to die in hospitals and all of this, they play a game of musical chairs within the civil service. This happens locally in government too. You know, they close schools, but those same people who are in charge of those things still have jobs. I think the civil service is too big. And I'm not talking about the people who get average money. I'm talking about the people who get big money.
What do you think, Paul, briefly? We're just coming at the end.
Yeah, I think we do have to look at the management structure. There's so many people in management. There's not enough frontline staff. That's got to change.
Well, very interesting points raised there. We'd like to know your feedback and what you think about it. I'm sure the three of us would say how wonderful the NHS staff are on the front line, and we're very grateful, and we'll talk more in part 2.